I mean, in your podcast, one of the things you always do, which I think is always really appropriate, is just asking you who you are generally and what your story is really, and starting from that point on what you've been doing these last few years or your whole career really.
Yeah, of course. I kind of got into policing by accident, really. I'd had sort of normal jobs, really. I'd worked sort of in financial services for a number of years, financial underwriting. Wasn't really my thing, really. Got married, I was only like 20, 23, 20, 23. And so what I did was I went back to college. So me and my wife had did a bit of like reversal in our roles. So I went back to college, looked after my son, and over that 2-year period, I kind of sort of got involved in various community initiatives and felt that I wanted to help people more and more and more. So the police service seemed to be a natural thing to look at. And also my lecturer at college at the time, who I'll always be indebted to, he said to me, it's a great career. I loved it. He kind of came out of it because of the drinking culture within the police at that time when he was there. It wasn't like that when I joined. So in 1995, I went through all the testing and then was successful and joined the police in 1995. And then it kind of grew from there, really. So I did various roles within the police, mainly specialising in community stroke neighbourhood policing. I did quite a lot of work around intelligence and also drugs and firearms, not me personally as a firearms officer, but coordinating firearms operations that involve drug supply, and those kind of things, which was immensely rewarding and satisfying. And then after 20 years, I'd been involved in an incident. I was a sergeant. I'd been in the police 20 years. I was involved in an incident where a young lad who we were about to arrest ran out of a property, ran past me, was knocked over by a car in front of me. Luckily, he survived. But me and a couple of colleagues were then investigated around potential wrongdoing, and a couple of things really. Suffered quite bad PTSD after the accident, and didn't realise for a while that I was suffering from PTSD. And I could see the writing on the wall for the police service, really. I could see that the police service was being cut severely by numbers, and I just felt that I needed to branch out and do other things, but still within the sector. So luckily for me, I've been working with the Housing Association in the Walsall area where I was a sergeant, and they had a vacancy for a community safety manager, and it was effectively managing housing stock around the more serious antisocial behaviour that is experienced by tenants, and the perpetrators 9 times out of 10 were our own tenants as well. So that was a massively great grounding for me, learning all about housing and how housing works and about tenancy agreements, and actually tackling some really high level antisocial behaviour. And then after 2.5 years, a job came up in Stoke-on-Trent for an antisocial behaviour manager to take on a very failing ASB service. It was a big challenge for me because it's like 40-odd miles, 43 miles from home. So I was travelling up to Stoke every day and back, and the M6 at the time was pretty horrendous and still is, as I found out yesterday. So that was a challenge in itself, but the service was absolutely rock bottom. And I'll be honest with you, after a couple of weeks, I thought, is this really for me? But me being me, I sort of knuckled down, had a great manager who sort of supported me 100% along the way. And we slowly but surely turned the business and the service around. And actually, last night, as an example, we were nominated for Team of the Year at the National ASB Resolve Awards, which is they're like a charity that are the ASB sort of guru, really, of ASB world. So, to go from where we were less than 3 years ago to actually be nominated for a national award just shows the journey that we've been on, really. So that in a nutshell really is my sort of my 25-year plus kind of experience around policing, housing and local authority work really, which really then put me in good stead to look at the podcast that I run, the Community Safety Podcast. And the whole idea behind that is to look at, say for example, look at knife crime in isolation. So for example, kids are killing kids on our streets. Why is that happening? Why? What can we do to change it? Because clearly what's happening at the moment and the structures and the methods that we're using at the moment are working. So what the whole idea of the podcast is to get key guests on board. I interview those guests and we look at how we can change things for the better, challenge the norm, get more people on board, leave egos at the door and work collaboratively to be able to reduce crime, reduce incidents on our streets. And the ultimate goal is to save lives. And for me, if the podcast saves one life during the cycle that we run it, then I know that will have a massive impact. I personally think we'll save a number of lives by the work that we're doing, because we're covering things like, you know, domestic abuse, honour-based violence, knife crime, violence, you know, antisocial behaviour. So all these really key subjects we're covering and we're challenging that norm. And I think over the time, you know, we will make some real massive differences. So that's it really in a nutshell. My career and the reasons why the podcast has come about really.
No, that's great. I mean, it's an expansive 25 years really, and you've done quite a lot in that. And I just want to unpick some of that, because obviously
Absolutely.
The police and then up to podcasting, it's quite a transition. But I think what, you know, people obviously are aware of what the police do and how they function, but maybe aren't so aware of what a community safety manager does. I mean, you've mentioned domestic abuse and drugs and all these different aspects, but what would like the day in, day out kind of job entail, and what kind of things were you tackling?
Yeah. So obviously we had at the time 20,000 stock, so we were responsible. So what happened with Walsall Housing Group, or WHG as they're now called, the council are obviously allowed in certain areas to offload their stock, so that they no longer manage housing. Like where I work in Stoke-on-Trent, our local authority does still manage around about 20,000 houses, but in Walsall, what they did was they created Walsall Housing Group, and then they transferred all the local authority stock over to Walsall Housing Group. So they sort of relinquished their responsibility, I presume to save money, I suppose, over time. So that's what they did. So my day job, I was one of two. We had a senior community safety manager, and then there was me and another manager. And the team was split into two. So we had like 5 officers each. And what our day job really was customers would ring up and contact us about antisocial behaviour, normally from tenants. So a lot of noise complaints, a lot of threatening behaviour from other tenants, or people that were friends of the tenants or acquaintances of the tenants. And our job really was to initially try and resolve it, use all sorts of things like mediation at a very early stage, warning letters, looking at potential tenancy breaches if they kind of continued with that behaviour. And one of the big things that we used a lot was the civil injunction. Now, the civil injunction is not a criminal matter, it's a civil matter. It's a lot easier to get than, say, prove a case criminally beyond reasonable doubt. And what it does is it protects, you know, it's a protection kind of part of the civil tools and powers. So we use the injunction to really good effect. And we only really use eviction as a very last resort. And the reason I do that is because I think the injunction is a much better tool. What I don't want to do, you know, is make people homeless, because I feel that if you're making people homeless, all you're doing is moving the problem. And for me, moving the problem does not really help the situation. You know, you're just moving the problem to someone else. So I'd much rather use a powerful tool like the injunction to try and curb that behaviour, control that behaviour. And obviously there are consequences if you breach that injunction, i.e., you know, I've seen quite a number of people who've breached an injunction a couple of times. Not that I want them to go down that route, but a judge will send them to prison for a number of weeks, if not months, for breaching that injunction, because it's effectively a contempt of court. So it was a very, very powerful piece of legislation, and it taught me a lot about housing. You know, it taught me a lot about how housing works, how complex it can be. And then, like you rightly said, on top of that, the other part of the role was helping domestic abuse survivors. So our role would be to, you know, have support mechanisms in place to safeguard, sometimes move people to new locations, but ultimately to look after those victims of domestic abuse, so that they felt protected, they felt safeguarded, they felt that we would signpost them to other agencies that could then come in and help them. And like I say, you know, in some instances we would move them as long as we were satisfied that, you know, the perpetrator wasn't going to find them somewhere else. We used to get a lot, believe it or not, we used to get a lot of victims say, oh, can I just move around the corner? And we're like, no chance, that isn't going to happen. If we're going to move you, we're going to move you to, you know, the other side of the borough, or even out of the area, because at that time we had stock out of the area as well. So, you know, it was very much about protecting those really vulnerable victims as well. So it was an immensely rewarding role, actually. And as I say, I think sometimes people think housing is quite simplistic, and probably on paper it probably is, but when you're actually working it day in, day out, it's a really complex subject, really, and one that I learned a lot in a 2.5-year period. And I think that then put me in good stead when I then moved on to local authority work.
Yeah, no, I mean, housing, it's interesting. It's something I would have never thought I myself would get really interested in, but recently, with a lot of the stuff with the pandemic and COVID, I've been doing a lot of research on student housing, and it's something I want to come back to in a minute. What I was going to say is that I found you because of LinkedIn and your activity on that, and you told a very interesting story about domestic abuse and your involvement, obviously, with this job and how you saved someone. And I thought that was a really excellent example of what you can do and how much you can affect someone's life in this role. I mean, would you mind just kind of retelling that?
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, that actually happened when I was in the police service. And what happened was I was a sergeant responsible for an area in Walsall in the West Midlands. And our job really was, we had a geographical area that we were responsible for as a sergeant. I was immensely proud of the work that we did within that particular area. It was I think what I'm pretty good at as a practitioner is coming into an area that's failing and sort of looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes, looking at it. And I think this comes back to the podcast, really, you know, where the podcast kind of sort of objectives come from, in terms of looking at how to do things differently. You know, not always, I'm not one to sort of just follow the crowd and just do what's been done time and time again. So I was very approachable as a sergeant, and I was approached by a woman who was in dire need of support and help. She'd just come out of a very, very abusive relationship, and the kind of abuse that I'll explain was, you know, she'd been raped by her partner or ex-partner. She'd had like massive clumps of hair cut out, you know, pulled out of her hair at the roots, to the point where the hair would not grow back. So she had to kind of like blow dry her hair in a certain way so that she covered the bald patch. She'd got 3 children, and they were all quite young at the time. I think the oldest at the time was about 8 or 9, and the youngest was about 3, I think. And she was just in a really bad place. So she, in the first instance, she needed signposting, which I did. But I just felt that the kids had obviously suffered an awful lot of trauma. They'd witnessed an awful lot of abuse towards their mum over quite a sustained period of time. So there was nothing really like magical about what I did, really. It was really just about keeping in touch with the family. So I'd pop, when I was out on patrol, I'd pop in, I'd have a cup of coffee with the mom, and I'd sort of like talk to the children and like just be there for them, and just like talk to them and just give them a bit of confidence, really, you know. And they liked the policeman going around, you know. I'd show them my handcuffs and my baton and my helmet. They'd wear my helmet and all that kind of stuff. And I've done this like many times with other families, you know, and I like that, you know. I like to get across to people that it goes back to the Pelian values, really, that, you know, the police are the public and the public are the police. And the point I'm trying to make there is that, you know, we're just normal people doing a difficult job. And I like to break down those barriers. You know, I like to talk about my family. I like to talk about my kids, to show these people that we're just normal people doing that job. And then over a period of time, I carried on popping in. And then one Saturday on patrol, I realised that there was something not right, and I needed to visit this family. And I don't know why, it was just a sixth sense that I had. So I go into the house, I speak to the mum, and she's all very, very, normally she's very open and, oh, well, you know, come in, Jim, have a coffee. And she'd sit in the kitchen, she'd stand in the kitchen having a cigarette and blowing the smoke out the window. I remember that really, really well. That used to make me chuckle. And, you know, and I'd be having my coffee and we'd just chew the fat and have a chat. And on this particular occasion, she was just really, really like frosty with me. And I looked at her and I just said, what's going on here? You know, there's something not right. And she got a coat on, and the kids were ready as well to go out. And I said, well, where are you going? And she said, oh, I've got something to tell you. She said, my ex has been in touch and I'm going to meet him, because the youngest, who was his son, he'd never met. He'd met, but only like in the very early stages of his life. So he'd like lost contact for like 3 years. And I just looked at her, and I think she could tell by the look on my face. And I just said, you know what, that is just the worst thing I've ever heard. And if you go today, what are you gonna experience for the rest of your life? I said, you could potentially, knowing what he's already done to you, you could end up dead. And what impact is this going to have on your children? And the one thing I'd say about this lady is that she was so in love with her kids. You know, she was one of the best mums I'd ever come across. And I think that resonated with her. And she sort of thought about it for a couple of minutes, and then she said to me, she goes, you know what, Jim? She says, you're absolutely right. So if I go there today, I'm effectively signing my death warrant. And I said, you are? Says, you are literally going to put your children in a really difficult position. And what are they going to witness? Well, you know, it'll be okay probably for the first few weeks or even months. I says, but slowly but surely things will go back to how it went. And what is the next stage? You know, you've already been raped, you've already had your hair pulled out, you know, to the extent where, you know, you have to blow dry your hair the way you do it. So I managed to convince her not to go. And I've still kept in contact with the family. They were absolutely devastated when I left the police service, because she wrote an amazing letter to my inspector at the time. And she's now, the kids are all doing fantastic. They're all doing really, really well. You know, they're not going to any trouble with the police or anything like that. She's now working a couple of jobs and is effectively working towards, I think, being a teacher. She's never gone back to the abusive partner. And she contacted me a couple of weeks ago and just said, you know, I'm really, really indebted to you for the rest of my life, really, because that conversation, well, from the first point when you came on and got involved with the family, but that day when you came in and you advised me and guided me not to go and meet that man, it was the best thing you could have ever done, and you've effectively saved our lives. And, you know, that the point, I think, we sometimes worry that we don't make a difference to people in our lives, but I think I've done that many times. And the point I want to get across in the interview is that we do make a difference. You know, we can make a difference, and one person can make a difference if you challenge the norm and you look at things differently from the norm. And I think that's, again, you know, just reinforcing that. That's what makes the way I do things slightly unique, in that, you know, I'm always looking at different ways. Like, for example, when I policed, we use the civil injunction as well as the criminal law, you know, as well as criminal law, because you can use both side by side. And it, you know, I was more effective tackling some criminality by using, you know, the injunction than by, you know, going down the criminal route where I've got to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. But with the injunction, the standard of proof was on the balance of probabilities. So I only had to prove the case like 51%. You know, so I was actually, you know, getting injunctions on people and banning them from areas that they'd grown up in, and effectively, you know, killed our burglary rate overnight. So it's about doing things differently, but for the right reasons. And you know, coming back to my point, you can change people's lives effectively overnight. So yeah, that was probably the best piece of work I've ever done, really. Although there were others that come fairly close. But yeah, I'm actually going to go and see them in a few weeks, actually, and catch up one Saturday morning, you know, and it would be lovely to see them all again after all these years. I haven't seen them actually since I left the police, but they're always on my mind, and I'm always wanting the best for them, and that family just is a great place. It's an amazing story, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lovely. And you said it, you know, you said you didn't do anything magical, and I understand why you say that, because really you're saying, you know, it's nothing outside the norm. I was just a human being. I just had that contact.
Yeah.
But I think that is partly magical, and it does. I think that story gets down to the heart of community and what it is, and it's about just looking out for people, and as you said, just noticing things, having that, as you said, sixth sense is immensely important. Just knowing when something isn't right, just seeing it for what it is, and being able to have the strength, and also, you know, to come out and say something's not right here. I'm going to try and do something about it.
I think something that I've always been good at is being able to speak, you know, even with senior officers and that, not doing it in a way that upsets and frustrates people, and, you know, rubs people's noses out of joint. You know, it's always about challenging for the right reasons, but at the same time challenging, coming up with a better solution. I think it's all well and good criticising. We can all criticize people. You know, take football for an example. We all criticize the managers, and we all sit there watching football thinking we can do a better job. But I think what I've tried to do is, if I've challenged the norm, then I've come up with a better solution. I think that's, again, you know, just reinforcing the podcast, really. That's the whole idea of what we're trying to do, is we're not just criticizing and sitting there and chewing the fat for, say, an hour and going, well, this is rubbish and that's rubbish. What we're actually saying is, well, we're not saying it's rubbish, but what we're saying is that we can challenge it and we can do things better, because we've got the brains in this country to be able to do that. And I think that's where I'm different, in that, you know, I'm not just going to sit there slagging the police off because I still feel one of them, and B, because we've got to come up with better solutions. And by implementing those solutions, we are going to have a much better community across the whole of the country. So yeah, I think you know, one person can make a difference to a lot of lives if they apply themselves in the right way.
No, I totally agree. I mean, talking about the police, I mean, there's a lot going on at the moment, and as you said, a lot of it's very negative. You've got the stuff that was happening with the Met only recently, with the murder and the other things as well. And then you've got the kind of Black Lives Matter movement. You've got the kind of defund the police movement. And then simultaneously, you've got a lot of negative things happening in terms of defunding or lack of funds. The police's budget was just frozen, I think, yesterday. It's a real kind of, you know, things are happening where it's all very negative in all different areas. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on the whole kind of landscape of policing at the moment. I mean, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly do. And it's one of the reasons why I left. I mean, apart from the PTSD that really hit me hard, and I knew that, you know, I was probably going to be, you know, quite badly mentally ill if I didn't leave. The other big reason really was around the funding. You know, I could see from 2010 how the budgets were slashed, but policing is so important in our country. And I've been fortunate enough to go over to the US and partner sort of other police departments, Dallas being one of them, and all those guys and girls were sort of so in awe of the way that we police in the UK, because we police by consent. And one of the things I've seen during the COVID period is, for me, the police have come out of this looking really bad. You know, where I've got absolute admiration for the NHS and what they've done, and we all stood on the steps for a number of weeks clapping the NHS at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. Totally get that. But I feel that the police came out of it really bad in terms of the protection that they were given, in terms of the PPE that they were given was substandard compared to what the NHS were given. They were you know, expected to go out and carry out the role during COVID. And I know a number of officers have suffered through that and actually contracted not only COVID, but long COVID, which is, as you'll probably know, has some quite long lasting effects, and, you know, could be sort of potentially life changing. Obviously the police were given the job to enforce the COVID rules in a very, that legislation, as we know, was passed through very, very quickly. It wouldn't have been massively well thought out because it was passed so quickly. And the police have then been given the job to enforce that. So they have been put in a very, very difficult position. And I have seen, like, with stuff that happened, with some of the COVID sort of demonstrations and some of the stuff that went on in Bristol during that period, I started to see the erosion of that policing by consent to a point. And that really kind of concerned me, because we pride ourselves as British police officers on the way that we police. And it would be a sad, sad day for me if we started to police in a different style and we started to see our officers routinely armed because of the dangers that they face. Because I've never really felt those dangers as a police officer of 20 years. In terms of the funding, I'm just completely flabbergasted by what I've seen this week. I think if there's ever a time to inject more money into the police service, it's now. And I appreciate COVID, appreciate everything that's gone on, but I really do feel that the police do need an injection of cash. I'm not a great lover of this direct entry scheme either, and I've got nothing against anybody with a degree. I think there's some amazing people out there, but what I do believe in is that you do need to be a police officer on the ground before you go to, say, rank of inspector or above. And I think there's nothing better than that grounding, because no matter what experience you've got as a person in general, there's no substitute for being an officer on the ground and learning from the bottom up. So, I think that's a big mistake. But yeah, the funding definitely needs to look at. And I just think, do you know what? I just feel that, I'm not political in any way, but I just feel this government needed to reward our officers for the work and the tremendous, exemplary work that they've done during COVID. And I just think this week is a massive slap in the face. And the only thing that's going to happen with this is that morale is going to be even lower. More and more officers are leaving the service. When I left, it was unheard of. An officer of my rank and my service leaving the police service after 20 years, unheard of, really. That you could count probably on one hand the amount of officers that did that. I'm telling you now, they're leaving in droves, and actually a number have left since I've gone. So we're losing all that experience. And, some of the kids coming in, I don't think they're seeing it as a career for life anymore, because the pension has been, severely cut in terms of the benefits that those officers, will get at retirement. So I think actually what you're going to see now is officers coming in, young kids coming in, doing the job maybe for 10 years max and leaving. And that can't be a good thing, because you're constantly then having to spend lots of money on recruitment, and you're going to be, losing a lot of experience and a lot of quality on more frequent cycles than you would now, currently you get at 30-year service. So yeah, I've got a lot to say on policing. I'm afraid it's not in a great place. And I think it needs a radical overhaul. The bottom line is the police do too much. They're asked to do far too much. And I think if I picked out one particular area where the police get sucked in far too much, is around mental health. I think our services in the UK are very, very underfunded again. The service there is inadequate. I've spent many an hour sat with a mental health patient because there isn't sufficient room for them, or there isn't the right professionals to assess them. And it happens more and more. And I think COVID has shown us that, even the strongest of people, their mental health has been tested. So again, that's put a massive strain on the police. So I think it does need a major overhaul in terms of funding, how we recruit, how we retain those recruits. And the only way you're going to do that is by a massive overhaul and making that role attractive again. So Yeah, sorry about
Yeah.
that. I've got a lot to say on
No,
police.
no, no. And I want to like unpack quite a lot of it as well, because there's a lot of different
Yeah,
interesting things there. The first
yeah,
one,
yeah,
kind of tying up a couple of them, is, I mean, recently, everyone's heard the kind of COVID vaccine passports coming in September. I mean,
yeah,
how on earth that is going to be policed, and also linking that to your idea of policing by consent, or just British culture in general with consent and freedoms and medical freedoms, all these different things. I mean, how do you see that even being practical if police are asked? I know at the stores or at the shops, people are going to have to scan, but the police are undoubtedly going to have to get involved in one way or another if they want to enforce this.
yeah.
And do you not see that being, with consent being at the core of policing, in your view, another reason why police officers will leave? We've already seen in France, for example, with the anti-lockdown, anti-pandemic kind of protests, you've seen police officers who were supposed to be policing the event effectively just join the protest against the government in France.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see this sort of
I
thing
do, I
happening over
do, and
here?
I just think, I just think the police service. You know, I still have the pleasure of working with Staffordshire Police every day of my life. You know, because of the work, the role I do, and I was actually out with a PCSO yesterday, a police community, police community support officer. Now we all know that when they came into the role in the early 2000s. Their role was really to be a visible presence on the street, more around an intelligence gathering sort of tool, you know, to go out there, talk to the community, get information. But what we've seen during COVID, I was talking to this PCSO yesterday at length. We were just out in the car, taking them to a job that we were doing together. And what I said to us, you know, what we found over the last, you know, certainly the period of COVID, but before that, the PCSOs are more and more doing the policing role, the police officer role, particularly around neighbourhood policing. Because what you're finding now is, because of the amount of volume and the demand on the police service, and again, this is where I think we've got to start looking at this demand and saying, what should the police do and what shouldn't the police do? What you've effectively now got is ill-equipped PCSOs, because let's face it, their training is nowhere near as specialised and in detail as an officer's. You know, so you're asking PCSOs to go out and perform a role that they've not even been trained to do. And what's happening is your police officers that are based on neighbourhood teams, and I'll give you an example of the cuts in a minute on neighbourhood teams since I left, but they're all just being used for response roles. So they'll come on duty with the clear intention of serving their communities that day within a geographical area. And all that happens now in a very, very short period of time is that, because now all the radios can be GPS tracked, the control room will see a neighbourhood officer in a particular area, the job will come in and they will be deployed. So we've got a real problem on our hands here now, because there's not enough police officers to go around. Neighbourhood policing has been completely eradicated, and we're now asking PCSOs to do the job of the officer that they haven't been trained to do. And also, if we think about it logically, they haven't got the same tools and powers that, you know, the powers that the officers, the warranted officer has got. So I think you are going to start, you know, if I look at my role and my life since I left the police service, you know, not boasting, but I'm earning a lot more money than I was when I was in the police service. The potential to earn more money over the next few years is going to be enormous from, you know, the way things are working out for me. You are going to see your average cop on the street thinking, you know what, there's something better out there for me. And particularly the ones that are on the new style pension compared to the old style pension, the one that I bought into. You know, even though I left after 20 years, you know, I'm still going to get a fairly reasonable pension when I reach the age of 60. These guys aren't. You know, are we realistically asking these guys to be rolling around on the floor with people when they're in their 60s and beyond? I don't think so somehow. And this is the crisis that we've got. So, yeah, I think we are at a very, very difficult point in the life of policing. there is only so much that people can do. And again, it comes back to there has to be a radical overhaul of what the police do and what they don't do, because at the moment they are the jack of all trades and they are the master of none. And I think there are certain roles and responsibilities that need to be taken away from the police to free them up to do what they're meant to do. And until that happens, I think you're absolutely right. You're going to see morale rock bottom, and you're going to see officers and PCSOs, for that matter, leaving the service in droves. And that does not bode well for the future, does it?
No, I mean, it certainly doesn't. Yeah, I think we're in a very tough point in just every aspect of life, tough. Not just police. It's not just the NHS, just every job, every person. I mean, and again, this comes back to your community work. And I mean, what are you kind of seeing and hearing from people, both obviously within the podcast and your own work as well right now with COVID? I mean, people are struggling with homelessness, people a bit with lockdowns, people have struggled more with domestic abuse.
Massive. I mean,
people who are young aren't getting jobs.
Domestic abuse has gone through the roof. It always does, particularly when we have, as you know, when we have a football championship, that is always a big factor as well. But COVID has had a massive factor. Normally where people would get respite because they'd be at work and they would get respite from that partner for, at least the daytime. They're not getting that now, or they weren't until this latest phase popped in. And yeah, I just think that we are in a really, really challenging position. What I'm seeing in the communities as well, I think I touched on it earlier, is mental health is at its height, and people that, and I've witnessed this, people that I've looked on as strong leaders, really strong leaders, have been affected by this. PCSOs to do the police officer role, and I think we were just talking about the fact that I think that you are going to start seeing a number of officers leave the service, and PCSOs for that matter. It's a really challenging time for the police service. It's quite interesting actually. I was just reading a post from a chief inspector whilst you were just sorting out the audio, and it was actually talking about people like Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, is it Musk? And it was actually talking about all the money that they've got and all the billions. Apparently, what was the quote here? I think he made £10 billion. Jeff Bezos made £10 billion or dollars in one day. And what we were saying was, what the post was saying was that, wouldn't it be fantastic if these people actually, put the money to support things like the police service? For me, why can't honourable people like this support services like the police? Can you imagine what someone like Jeff Bezos could do, or a Richard Branson could do for the police service in this country if they were willing to make a sizable donation? It could actually transform it.
Well, I mean, I was talking about this with my partner the other day, and we were looking at the space flights that Bezos was doing, and he spent 5.5 billion on this space flight, and he was only up there for less than 10 minutes.
I know.
And he didn't even get to space, really, not properly.
But if you look at the money that they earn and how much, I don't know what the annual budget is for UK policing, but, I'd say a very small fraction of their wealth, if you say directed that into policing in this country, it would make an absolute massive difference. And I don't know why, I'll be honest with you, if I was, and I've always thought this, that if I ever came into a serious amount of money, why would I need all that money? And I would definitely help bigger organisations that need it. I'd certainly make a donation to the police service if I ever was in a lofty position, so millions of pounds. I would definitely donate. And I don't understand why. Two questions really: why aren't the police service maybe open to donation? Probably because they fear corruption. But there's got to be ways around that. No one's above the law at the end of the day.
I think
to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely idea. I think the problem is, as you said, the corruption element. I mean, if you've got someone like Bezos or Musk or whoever else who have got this much money and they're donating to the police, I think that would be quite frightening for the public on many levels, simply for the fact that, okay, well, now the police is almost entirely funded by a private entity, and what's that mean for their corporation? They're more powerful than the government in many ways at that stage, which I think a lot of them are already, but I think that would almost cement it for a lot of people. It's difficult, and I think, as you were saying, like, oh, if I was that rich, I would give this money to the this entity or this organization. But I think if you do get to that stage, I think a lot of these guys, if you are able to make billions and billions, then you're probably not of that mindset, I think, to get to that position.
You're probably right. I mean, I see a lot of schemes around the country, where the government donate, really sizable chunks of money to projects around the country. And I totally get that. But for me, these kind of things should only really be done when you've got sort of a point where the basics are covered. Does that make sense? So for me, the government shouldn't be releasing all this extra cash for various projects around the country if we can't even keep policing's head above water. For me, that money should always be directed into the right channels before we start saying, well, we'll fund this project or we'll fund that project. You're talking some projects, millions of pounds.
Yeah.
And yet the police are scratching around for, a few quid here, a few quid there. It does, again, that doesn't make sense to me. That extra funding should be a luxury and not, and when policing is struggling and that money is then being diverted into other areas, and particularly if it's coming out of the Home Office, which I know it does, that is a big concern for me, that is.
Well, I agree, and I don't want to inject my political beliefs in here, but I would rather have a smaller government that does exactly those things, those core things. What is the purpose of government? That's what you have to ask yourself. And
I think they do too much. It's it's about, I think they spread themselves too thinly, and the money doesn't get pulled in the right ways. And this is why I think we see the crisis that we're facing at the moment.
Well, I think people are getting really fed up, as I said, when we mentioned like the COVID passports or I mean, pretty much all the things that are happening over the last year and a half. People are getting really sick and tired of being told and parented and mollycoddled by the government on what they should do, especially when in consideration of what you're saying, where they're not even funding the things that people do really want them to fund. No. It's madness, but hey, that's unfortunately the world we're living in at the moment, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we haven't really talked about your podcast, and I really want to learn more about that as well. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about how you've mentioned briefly at the beginning how that started and that sort of thing. But what kind of made you want to get into that? I mean, because it's quite a shift, and I don't know if you had any podcasting experience before or speaking experience before, but it would be interesting.
No, not really. I mean, I've always been quite open. I mean, I've done a lot of sort of high-profile briefings in the police service, so I learnt very early on that preparation and sort of how you kind of project your voice, I suppose, and how you get, how you motivate people. I've always been a sort of leader that's always been the sort of motivational type person and get the best out of people. But when I was a kid, I was always interested in radio, and I wanted to be a DJ, but I never did anything about it, So it was always a bit of a passion, but not something I ever really pursued. And then when I was a police officer in Smethwick in the West Midlands, me and another officer, we were on at that time, the numbers were brilliant, and we were actually part of a Home Office funded project called the Crime Fighting Team. And what that was that the government put in an extra load of money and effectively paid above and beyond the budget, the police normal budget, for our wages. for, I think it was a 3 or 4 year period. I think it was a 4-year period initially. And we were effectively ring fenced. So we were able to they gave us like the most deprived areas, and it was sort of like, right, there's a sergeant and 8 officers. This was pre-PCSOs. Get out there and change that community for the better. And obviously one of the big things for us was around antisocial behaviour and diverting young people. And what we said was, what we find a lot of cases as authorities, and that we tend to dictate to the young people what we want them to do rather than asking them. So we actually turned it on its head. Again, me sort of trying to do things differently. So we turned it on its head and went out and spoke to kids and said, we surveyed them and we said, what do you want in this area? How, what would float your boat? And what came back a lot of the time was, we want a DJ and we want a radio project. We hadn't got a clue, we just literally sat down with one A4 piece of paper one day and sort of put all this together. And cut a very long story short, within a very short period of time, we had a board. It was all agreed by our police senior officers, obviously. We set up an organisation. We eventually had our own premises that me and another officer were running on top of our day jobs. We had 2 studios. We had a mixing deck area. We'd bought proper Audio Technica decks that were worth about, I don't know how much it cost, about 1,200, 1,300 quid each. And we were training, not us personally, but we brought in a company to do it. We were training about 100 kids a week. And then the height of it was, what we did was, and you've probably heard this, we managed to get a restricted license for a week during one of the school holidays, and we actually broadcasted live to that community on a night on an FM channel of frequency. So it was that really that kind of got me into it and understood how radio works and how broadcasters make broadcasting look easy, but actually there's a structure. So I think that's what it taught me. And then what happened last year in the summer, just as lockdown kind of was in the throes, I just thought one day, I just had this light bulb moment one day, because of my specialist area of antisocial behaviour, wouldn't it be nice to put together some very short 10-minute max videos around various different subjects within ASB? So like one on the injunction, one on the closure order, one on neighbour disputes, all the key things. And the success of that was really, really good. And then I just got thinking about what else I could do. And I've always wanted to make a difference. And I've never really been a podcaster. I've never really listened to podcasts. There's just one podcast I've listened to, which is the one that a guy called Jake Humphrey and a guy who I know called Damien. What's his name? I can't remember his surname. But they basically put a podcast together called the High Performance Podcast, and they tend to interview sports personalities, business leaders around. Damien Hughes, that's it. Who they do an awful lot of interviews around, how people have come from where they are to where they are, and that sort of resonated with me. And I just thought, what can I do? I'm not going to do antisocial behaviour because it's too narrow, it's too niche, and there's only so much we can talk about. But community safety, that's an awesome idea because it's very niche still, but contained within community safety are so many different elements. So I saw that as a light bulb moment to say that could really run, because you need something niche. As a podcaster, I think you go into it initially thinking everybody's going to want to listen to this because everybody loves community safety. Well, no, they don't really, do they? But what you have got is a very niche audience, and quite a wide niche audience that will tap into that. So came up with the idea, didn't know anything about podcasting, had to kind of learn it almost sort of self-taught and tapping into experts, that know what they're doing. And then that was September last year. So I spent an awful lot of time preparing, marketing, growing my network on LinkedIn, and that was a really key part to it. Putting out lots and lots of promotional stuff during the sort of the pre-launch time, and just was very, very cheeky and asked some really high-profile people if they'd come on. People like Nazir Asval, and who's the ex-chief prosecutor of the Northwest, Caroline Good, who there was a TV program about her and the horrific honour-based killing of a young Iraqi Kurdish girl called Banaz Mahmood, which is a murder that always really stuck in my mind, because it was her body was eventually found in a shallow grave in a garden in Handsworth in Birmingham. So although I wasn't directly involved in the case, I always remembered it really well, and I always had a keen interest in trying to stop honour-based violence. So yeah, I was just able to get a lot of great individuals together. I was also lucky that I approached 3 sponsors who all put a bit of money into the project. So I was able to give the project kudos, because they were all companies that were kind of specifically chosen and were working within the field of community safety, which was great. And then, yeah, just self-taught really. Taught myself really how to put a program together, put a podcast together, and made sure that the quality was really good. So we bought good quality. I've got a really good quality microphone here, a German Shure SM7B. And then also what I do is I've got some Audio Technica microphones that I actually loan out to guests as well, so that we maintain that quality. We don't do it on Zoom. We do it on like a platform called Squadcast. And again, it compresses the audio in a much more crisper, neater way. So effectively, when you've listened to my podcast, it actually sounds like we're in the same room, like we're literally talking to each other in the same room. So yeah, that's really how it's evolved. And I think by growing the network the way I did and being quite niche, we've just been able to kind of reach out to an awful lot of people. And we've, like, as I said to you before, we've set the record, we're now a 1% podcast for the whole of the world. That's out of 2.5 million podcasts, which isn't massive, but it's still big. And we've just hit 30,000 downloads this week, and we launched on the 23rd. Actually, it was actually our 6-month anniversary yesterday. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey actually, and it's something I'm immensely proud of. And I think a lot of practitioners, from the feedback that I'm getting, are really enjoying that challenging the norm, looking at innovative ways of changing communities. And ultimately, my main goal, as I said earlier on in the conversation, is to save lives, and save lives on a consistent, regular basis. And I think ultimately what we're going to do is challenge government, really. We've been talking a lot about that today, and about how we can change things. And I think I want to use this platform to continue to challenge. And although I know realistically I'm not going to change everything in my lifetime and in your lifetime, I'd like to have a bloody good go, and bring some great brains, as I've already done, into this space, and share that kind of experience and ideas with the wider sort of community safety community and wider, so that we can continue to spread the message and really, really invoke some good change. So yeah, that's that. I've talked a lot there, sorry, but yeah, that's how it kind of all evolved, really, and that's how it's kind of the journey that we're on, and we're now on this really exciting journey that I'm hoping will grow and grow and grow.
No, and it's just a fantastic milestone as well to get to that in 6 months. Yeah,
it's incredible, people don't realise. I don't know how we've done it. I mean, I've obviously paid for, we've been lucky that we've had a bit of money, so we have paid for like marketing campaigns, and rightly so. It's like what any business would do. I pay people to specifically target the right niche, and I do a lot of work on social media myself to grow that audience. That's how business works. And you do realise, although I'm not in it for making money, you do realise that you are actually running a business, a small business, and it is very much a 24/7, a 24/7 business, really. It's evolving every day, and you've got to nurture that baby every single day. And I think statistics actually say that most people give up on podcasting after the 7th episode, because they maybe haven't niched down enough. They haven't really thought about the quality. I think a lot of people set a podcast up and they think they can press the distribute button, excuse me, and it will go viral. It doesn't work like that, as you rightly know. it takes a lot of hard work. To get to 30,000 downloads has taken an incredible amount of work, not just by me, but by my support team as well, that I've managed to kind of hook wink on board. And they are what helped me maintain the quality that we've put out there. But yeah, it's hard work, but it is the most enjoyable project that I've ever done. If I could do this full time, boy, I'd do it. I absolutely love every minute of it. I love broadcasting. That's the bottom line. I absolutely love. There's something magical about getting behind a microphone and talking to people and reaching out to people and spreading that message. And I think you can tell that by the way I'm talking now. I'm just incredibly passionate about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't say you're talking about doing it full time. I don't think you're far off. If you keep going at this rate, you'll soon be able to, I'm sure. In one way.
I mean, a nice thought. I mean, we've just set up we've and this is it. There's lots of offshoots from this, and I've just set up a business with a guy who's an ex-police officer from the UK. He left like me, left early, married a woman in the States. He's now in Minnesota. And we're actually just in the process of launching a business where we're saying we'll help you to launch a podcast from initial sort of like launch to, initially to launch. So we'll take them through all those steps. And there's real opportunities there to help other people. And I think because we're so passionate about it, yeah, if there's monetary gain to be had from it, great. But we really genuinely enjoy just spreading our knowledge and sharing that knowledge and helping other podcasters not make the same pitfalls and mistakes that we, fall into the pitfalls and make the same mistakes that we've made along the way. So yeah, it's bloody exciting, and it's really, it's like I'm 52 this year, and what I would say is that. Another thing I'd say is, never give up on the fact that, never give up on aspiring to better yourself, and never give up on your dreams, because I'm kind of living my dream at the moment. This is what I really enjoy doing. And I think sometimes people can get into their 50s and think they're on the sort of slippery slope. And for me, this is my time now. I'm not 52 is in this day and age is nothing, I've got all that life experience now, from 20 years in the police, the housing, the local authority, all that experience, I can now turn it into something really, really exciting. And it's probably something that I wouldn't have been ready to do at 25, because I hadn't got that experience. So I think there's no substitute for experience, but also people should be still open to opportunity and making differences in the world, even when they're in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It should never be a young person's game, in my opinion, because there's no substitute for experience, is there really?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there have been so many things like this popping up. Obviously our magazine was created during lockdown. Yours was created in the last 6 months. I've spoken to numerous people over the last year and a half who have just suddenly come up upon an interesting idea or a project or a community or a volunteering group or whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
It's
absolutely.
Just kind of
I'll be totally honest with you. I'm quite open about this, because the reason I do this is because I want to help others. But I suffered from quite a lot of mental health when I was in the police, and sort of buried it for many, many years. I've suffered from quite serious anxiety and not believing in myself. And because when I joined the police, there was a massive, and there is in society in general, really, a massive stigma around mental health. So, if I'd have, and I've seen this happen with other officers, if I did ever disclose that I was suffering from mental health and had to have, say, a period of sickness, I would have come back and, being classed as, not that I like this term, but, classed as a nutter. I'd have been kind of ostracised. And so one of the things I've really made a point of doing since I've left the police is being quite open and honest about my journey and, the dark periods that I've had in my life, where I came very close a few years back to taking my own life because I felt there was no other way forward. And I think by sharing that and being brave enough to share that story, it resonates with a lot of people. Again, I hope it saves lives. And again, I think what I do is show that you can get through those barriers. And I've managed to learn how to deal with challenges and to go through those pain barriers and to take that step beyond the norm and the comfort zones. And the what I try and show people is the sort of the outcome of that is success. You know, I'm not saying I'm hugely successful, but for me, the measure of success isn't always monetary. The measure of success in some ways is like peace of mind and you know, good mental health, knowing that you're helping people. So, you know, for me, there's lots of different measures of success. And I think for what I'm doing now is, you know, what I love doing. And I think it is a huge measure of success from where I was to where I am now. You know, I'm lucky that I'm sat here this morning or this afternoon speaking to you, because, you know, probably 6 years ago, I was in a very kind of, you know, probably 80% chance that I was going to potentially take my own life, you know, and I, you know, planned it out many times, you know, and how I was going to do it. And I think it was probably the love for my family that stopped me doing it. So it just shows that people can come through those dark periods with the help and love of other people and make good. And I think that's really an important message that I need to keep spreading.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's just so easy, particularly now when the whole world's not really going right in many ways, and we're kind of away from our communities and away from the people that we love or things that we like doing, that things can become a lot more difficult. And in any regard, we always keep beating ourselves up about lots of different things, whether it's, you know, if you're trying to run a business but it's not making money, or trying to do a project and it hasn't gone perfectly well, or just in any area of life. And it's so easy.
Do you know what I think the big problem is with society, and I think social media has to play a bit of a part in this, is that, and I did a video on this on LinkedIn recently, and I'm still not 100% out of this, but I am probably not, 95% of it is, I think we worry too much about what other people think of us. And I think that's a big thing in society. And I think, you know, I personally wouldn't want to be a young person now growing up with the social media that is, you know, that they are now exposed to, and how they can be shamed and bullied and gaslighted and all that sort of stuff. It's all very negative for me in some ways. There is a lot of positivity about social media. There's no two ways about that. But there's also an awful lot of negative side of it as well. And I really do think that people need to stop worrying too much about what people think. You know, yeah, obviously, if you're doing something immoral, clearly, you know, there's an issue there. But if you just want to do something different, and if you want to go and do something that's not the norm, like what I did, you know, leave the police after 20 years, that wasn't the norm. Everybody thought, what the hell are you doing? That's a big mistake. But I've proved them all wrong. And I've had to ride above what they think of me to be able to get to the point where I am now. So I think people have got to stop worrying too much about, you know, not living their lives through other people. We only get one life. You know, none of us know what's on the other side. I'd like to think there is, but none of us really know that for a fact. And so effectively, we get one life, and we should really live it. And it's taken me probably 50 years to realise that. So I'm going to seize every day. And make the right decisions to give myself a better life and not worry about what people think, because I think that's a big key. You talk to a lot of people, it's a massive issue. We deal with a lot of peer pressure in this country, and we are, you know, the way our culture is. I speak to my mate Simon about this. You know, in our country, we tend to big people up and then knock them down, and we then seem to get a lot of pleasure out of like seeing them squirming and failing. Where I think in the States, it's very much about, if you fail, it's like, well, get off, get up, dust yourself down, and get back on the horse, and we'll sort of commend you for the effort that you've put in. So I think there needs to be a completely different mindset in terms of how you achieve things in this country, because we do put too much emphasis on what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this is the reason why I created the magazine that we have, is that when I was doing student journalism, every newspaper you'd write for, every magazine, everyone would be very concerned, particularly within the university space, of offending someone or saying something that someone else didn't believe in, which was the total antithesis of what I expected it to be, which was free debate, enjoying talking to people about different subjects or whatever it may be. And it ended up not being that. And I think, you know, people do worry too much about what other people think, and feel obviously we want to think about what other people think and feel, but in a too broader sense, where people are getting too worried about that and getting too consumed.
Absolutely. And I think I've realised that once you let go of that, you become free. It's like with the podcast, we talk openly on that. We do get a bit edgy, and I've made it really clear. If you listen to my original broadcast where I'm explaining what the podcast is all about, I say, I am going to be edgy. I'm not going to be completely politically correct with everything. We don't swear. I mean, we make a point of not swearing. I didn't want a podcast where everyone's effing and blinding. That I've drawn the line at that, and I like that, because I want children to listen to it. Even though we do mark it up as explicit, just to give parents that warning, I do want children and young people to listen to it. So we've made a point of not having swearing and that kind of stuff, but we are edgy, and for me, if we're not going to challenge the norm, there's no point in being edgy if we're not going to do that. So that's really, really important for me. That we might offend people. I don't think we have. From the feedback we've been having, I think people like that. I think people like the fact that, one of the beauties of podcasting at the moment, and I hope it never changes, is that unless the content is really offensive and clearly needs to be taken off air, we are really open to do what we want, as long as we're not being libelous, which clearly we're not. I think we've got the freedom to do what we want, really. And that's what I love about podcasting space, is that we have got that freedom.
Yeah, and just going back to your social media commentary as well, I mean, that's just not happening on all these different places, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. It is becoming more controlled, and there is less freedom for creators and commentators and journalists in any regard. I mean, if you say anything that goes against the norm in any aspect, it seems these days, you're pretty much just banned and taken off the air. So I think having that freedom is so important, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we've seen so many different platforms crop up over the last 18 months.
I mean, I don't think we get to the point where people are saying, I think what I'm able to do, and I don't know whether I do it, I suppose I do intentionally. What I don't want to do is become unprofessional in what we're trying to achieve. What I don't want to do is rub people's noses out of joint, push people's nose out of joint, rub people up the wrong way. I think we do it in a professional way. I think that's key to it, really, that we don't become, completely, risque and completely off piste, really. I think it's really important that we still remain professional and we have a proper, honest, professional conversation. And I think as long as we stick to that structure, I don't think we'll go far wrong. But at the same time, we will still challenge the norm with the very, very important guests that we get on the show.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, if you're not doing that, though, you're not going to be able to have a proper conversation. I mean, if we're just talking about like kind of the Twitter,
exactly.
Here's 120 characters of why I'm angry with no substance, then it's not very productive anyway, is it?
No.
So
and again, I think it comes back to how you structure your show and how you I can honestly say every single episode is well thought out, and before you even switch record on where you want it to go and what you're trying to achieve. And you do get some kind of like golden nuggets that come out of stuff. But I would honestly say that every single episode we've done so far, the content has been just unbelievable. And the people that are working within the industry, and people like, involved in community safety in the wider spectrum as well, like people that are in neighbourhood watch and things like that. I think they're getting an awful lot from it. And then the next stage really is to start having like a series of webinars where we can then bring in maybe some of our original guests and other guests that are, detailed then, so we can start using some of the content from the interviews, but then sort of stoking up more and newer conversations to take it a stage further. So I think that's where we're going to go with this, really. And I think that's a natural progression.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. I think having with more than one person or getting people from different areas as well is always really interesting. You've recently done one about student issues or young people's issues, and then getting someone from other areas and then being able to talk those out, I think you can get a lot of interesting answers and a lot of interesting ideas.
I think you can keep revisiting. Like, we're really keen to keep revisiting domestic abuse, things like that. And I want to revisit honour-based violence, because you get lots of different perspectives, and I think people like that, So that's the beauty of it, is we don't just have to do honour-based violence or domestic. We've already done domestic abuse twice, and that's great, because both stories were so unique and so different, but the ultimate goal was, you can survive this. And it comes back to that story that I told you earlier. So when women listen, and men for that matter, because let's be honest, men do suffer domestic abuse too. It's not just majority of the cases. I think it is. Statistics prove that, but we know, and I know from my own family's experience of males within my family that have suffered that. People resonate with this, and it gives them the strength to leave an abusive relationship. So again, it comes back to the point, there's real gains from this podcast, real gains. And we know, and I know, that from the content we're putting out, we will definitely be saving lives. There is no question in my mind. And I'm pretty sure we've actually done that already. I bet you if we did some real hardcore analysis, people were willing to give us, there's probably been a number of people that have actually left relationships just by the content that we've put out. That's got to be a brilliant thing, hasn't it? That makes me feel really good.